And Chapel for the final time in this race. So close is Freddie Rasmussen to the back of the Alpine again, but straight line speed is going to come to his aid as they run up towards Stowe Corner. George, let's bring this home.
Well, let's see who's going to come up on top and reign supreme. Otis Lawrence, though, holds all the cards coming out of the long hanger straight. Rasmussen, though, coming close at the end of Stowe. Is he going to try a late move? In comes Opmeer. He's coming in for a late move into the pits. Now, what is this going to do? Is this going to offer him a potential race win? Crossing the line? I don't think so. Here comes Otis Lawrence now as they cross the line. Jarno Opmeer has won it from the pit lane. My goodness me! Jarno Opmeer has taken the Tiger line and victory, crossing the start-finish line in the pits ahead of Otis Lawrence. That is extraordinary. I've never seen anything quite like that before.
Is this even allowed?
I don't see anything wrong with it. That's why not.
Yes, it fucking worked!
Well done. GG's.
No way!
That's a new one.
Oh my god.
JD here, and as you can see, we are back. And back once again, reviewing some footage from Mr. Jarno Opmeer, who I'm sure if you're not living under a rock, everyone knows who that is. The current esports world champion, a 3-time esports world champion. And I promise that this is not going to become the Jarno Opmeer channel, but in future I will be covering many events from the F1 esports space, along with the really just the competitive space, since that's what I've been doing myself for the past decade or so. And recently, or I would say yesterday, there was a bit of a controversial incident in the round 3 of PSGL, which arrived at Silverstone. Just to give you a little bit of a summary, this race was completely in the intermediate conditions, and due to the nature of this game, makes overtaking pretty much impossible. In the dry, it's already difficult enough, but in the wet, it is very difficult to overtake, especially with the dirty air effect. And the only way you can really overtake is going to be either through strategy, having a significant tyre delta, or in the pits. And typically when you overtake in the pits, it's going to be when people are pitting at the same time as you. They get held in their pit box slightly, and then you jump ahead of them. But when we're talking about the pits this time, this is a little bit of a different scenario, as you can see at the start of this video, because what happened here, if you haven't really guessed by now, is that in the final moments of the last lap, entering the final chicane, Sector 3 at Silverstone, Jarno decides to pit at the very last moment, and with this manoeuvre, he won the race by a mere 8 thousandths of a second. And yeah, so before even getting into this, and of course I really want to hear your opinions, because the more opinions we have, the more of a consensus we have on whether this was actually legal, should he keep the win, should he be punished, things like that. So please post down below what your thoughts are. But before I even get into that and I give you my opinion of the situation, first of all, I think this was absolutely executed to perfection. In the heat of the moment, with the adrenaline and the conditions, he pretty much nailed this pit entry. If he was about 1 to 2 miles per hour slower, or he didn't deaccelerate in the perfect timing, he wouldn't have won the race. If anything, it could have actually backfired on him quite a bit. And with Jarno, known him for quite a long time, obviously he's been racing quite a long time, he might not be the fastest driver on pure pace in esports, especially when it comes to that qualifying, but I think what makes him a different level, in my opinion, is just his racing IQ, his management of races, his composure. He really is in a different class in this aspect, and why he is the only 3-time esports world champion. And the scary thing is, I think if he could just improve his qualifying, just his raw pace in the qualifying, could get into that top 5 or even top 6 consistently, I think he's going to be winning many more titles to come. And I think this was just another example of how he just executes things under pressure, and again, just has that different level of racing IQ and management of races, which we have seen time and time again. You know, there are things such as luck, but if it keeps on recurring quite consistently, then you would have to call it talent in the end. But now the big question, should Jarno keep his win by doing this maneuver? Quite simply, if it's not within the rules, then yes. I don't have the PSGL rulebook to hand with me, but if there is not a rule written that you cannot pit on the last lap, you can't pit after you've done your mandatory stop, and you can't finish the race in the pit lane, then technically you can't punish something that isn't actually in the rule book itself. So again, if it's not in the rules and it doesn't say you're using a pit lane as effectively a shortcut, then you can't really punish something that hasn't actually been enforced in the first place. Also, recognizing that the pit lane scenario is actually faster, as I said before, is pretty much a 1000 IQ move. I believe Silverstone is actually the only track that this could be possible. Please let me know in the comments if there's other tracks that could be, but what comes to mind, I can't really think of any other tracks. That maybe like a Monaco, potentially. It depends where the start-finish straight or start-finish line is actually starting. But Silverstone, because you've got that really slow last couple of corners, and it's actually really juicing the distance of a track. Also, it would need to be ideally in the perfect weather conditions as we had here in the intermediates. I think in the dry, depending on the pace of the drivers around him, what's happening, most of the time it actually wouldn't even be faster in the dry. So for him to actually execute this in the moment when it wasn't actually guaranteed to be beneficial, if anything, again, depending on how he executed the pit lane, the conditions and what the other drivers are doing, this actually could have backfired him quite a lot. If he didn't actually exceed the speed limit, which he didn't violate any of the pit entry restrictions, crossing a white line, timed acceleration to perfection, it's within the rules. So how could you say that this is actually going to be a punishment? But what some people will say is something a little bit like this. So, number one, I think I've seen this quite a lot on social media, that it's against the spirit of the racing. So although it might not be against the rules or not in the rules itself, you're bypassing competitors by taking the pit lane as effectively a shortcut. You are reducing the distance of the track. So it's almost like doing a corner cut and you're not getting punished by the game. However, again, the pit lane is a valid part of the track to be on. If it says in the rules that, or if it doesn't say in the rules that you can do this, then technically you could actually do it. But again, some people would argue that this is kind of gaming the system. The next, that it is just a big exploit. Albeit you can't do this at many tracks, or really I don't think comes to mind any other track, and in certain conditions it isn't a legitimate route. And I think the biggest argument against this is that you are not actually making an overtake on track, and you are not actually crossing the physical finish line. The counter argument to that again is that sometimes overtakes can be made in the pits when other cars get held up, but in this scenario it was just Jarno himself. So yeah, at this point I think is probably the one most in favour that this shouldn't be allowed. Is you basically are using a shortcut to overtake drivers and you're not doing it on the track itself. But again, this always leads back to, if it's not in the rules, how could you punish it if it's not going to be in the rules itself? And I think really the final thing is that if this is going to generate a rule change where you must finish the race not in the pit lane and you must actually cross the start finish line to finish a race itself after you've done your mandatory stop or done any pit stop for that matter, if that comes into play, and to really avoid this happening again, then you could argue that this isn't really a fair maneuver and this actually shouldn't be allowed. So what is the verdict and what my opinion really is on this situation? Right now, I would actually say the result should actually stand, because there is actually nothing within the rules, if there is nothing in the rules, that you can't pit on the last lap and use the pit lane to finish a race if you've already made a mandatory stop. In wet weather conditions, obviously because of the tyre wear, they were forced to pit, but you don't actually have to pit. But in this scenario, they already did pit, so it doesn't really matter in this argument. But with this here, if there's nothing in the rules saying you can't use a pit lane on the last lap or use a pit lane to finish the race, then technically you can't actually punish this maneuver in the first place. However, like I said, if the league feels a rule was missed and it needs to be introduced, a compromise could be that simply the positions that were gained are returned. So he went from third to first, simply just revert him back to third in that case, unless he had a massive off in his final chicane, which is would be pretty unlikely. But I would say that would be a fair compromise if they feel that this is something that really does need to be introduced and it was an unfair exploit, then simply let him keep the position in third, don't punish him. But I think if he was to get like a 5-10 second penalty or even disqualify from the race, I don't think that's really permitted if they've missed it on the rule book in the first place. So again, if there isn't a rule against it, then you can't punish it. But also doesn't mean the exploit should be rewarded, and I think that's actually a fair argument. But in real life, we have had scenarios like this before. I think Schumacher in 98 Silverstone, I believe. You had Renault with the dampeners, Red Bull with the diffuser, Ferrari with the engine injection exploit. So there's always been loopholes and grey areas, but I do think sometimes it is common sense, and even though it might not be within the rules, doesn't mean you should actually be rewarded for it. In this case, if it's not in the rules, I think it should stand, but then definitely introduce a rule moving forward. Although it probably would only apply to Silverstone in these kind of conditions. I can't think of any other track in any other conditions where it actually would be faster to do this. But I think a very simple rule is, on the last lap of the race, you must be crossing the actual physical finish line in order to have your position warranted. Let me know what you think. It was a very, very exciting end to the race regardless, but those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours, and I will be catching you very, very soon. Peace.